Wait, did we talk about that last time? Yeah, we talked about you getting COVID last time, right?
When do we? It's been so long. Like we kind of.
It's been two. No, it's been 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks.
I don't think so. I got I
Jangan.
got COVID the week before Chinese New Year.
Oh shit, that's right.
Yeah, people were pissed. Like
Are you?
at me, yeah, because a lot of people in the office had tickets to go home, and because they were close contacts, they couldn't fly, so they had to cancel the Chinese New Year plans because of me, and I feel kind of bad about it. So now I have to buy them all
Oh
lunch
dear.
because they're like, "Hey, asshole."
Lunch.
Yeah.
Lunch. It's gonna solve missing their family they haven't seen in years because of COVID. Wow.
I mean, what do you want me to do? It's a gesture, right?
Well, I think that's the whole point. I mean, I don't know. What is your stance on this? Like, and I don't know what's happening in Singapore, Jangan, but like, is COVID over? Should we be moving on? Like, what do you guys think?
Oh my god, it's so over. Can we just move on with life, please? Like, are we talking about like like our personal feeling, or are we talking about like the
Personal feeling.
policy? Those are different
No,
things, right?
I mean, yeah, personal feeling.
I don't know, man. It's
But
been
I think you were over it for months already. I think.
dude, I've been over it since last year. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it's so ridiculous. Like, if you think about it, like half of the things they do don't really make sense, like scientifically or based off like popular
Yeah.
consensus of policy. Like, if you look at what's happening and use like the U.S. as a baseline, people are saying that, like, first of all, like the only masks that are really effective now are N95s, right? But everyone here is still wearing like
Oh,
cloth masks.
cloth mask.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, what's the point? It's not really effective anyway, but they're still doing it. And then all of these like travel restrictions, like China has the most onerous travel restrictions, and they still have Omicron. So those clearly don't do
Yeah.
anything either. And at this point, I think a lot of these people are just like, they're committed, right? It's like, oh, we've
Yeah.
taken this position politically or socially or whatever, and we can't back down now. So we just have to like go like lean into it until
No, I think that's
until
the American view, right? I think here it's more of the fear mentality. People just can't let go mentally.
No, I think it's the Chinese view too.
People-
I think the Chinese
People are just scared.
I think people's sentiment changes from time to time. So
That's
I
true.
think
That's true.
that makes policy making difficult, and also I mean, you have different groups of people with different opinions. So it's hard to make everyone happy. So I mean, if you look at the situation in
No.
China, like one week everyone's complaining that okay, you have having too many restrictions, and the other week some other news came out saying that there's some like death toll in certain country. Then people say, oh, we're glad the government is doing the right thing. So it just
Okay, wait. How much of this is actually media driven and actual populist consensus?
I don't
think
believe
it's-
populist consensus, but yeah.
yeah, I think in the U.S. it's mostly media driven. I think
Yeah, no, that's true. I think everyone I know back home in US, everyone's over it. I just don't know any person who's like, I mean, like they've been so loose with masks wherever. Even here, even though there's a mask mandate, we just don't talk about it. No one, but everyone's loose with it too here.
yeah.
But I will say that even I mean, scientifically, whatever, blah blah blah. But even a cloth mask does help. I haven't gotten sick in the past 2 years, which every year I always get sick, like especially during the end of the year when people are getting together, right? So, I mean, there is some degree of it helping. I think.
I think it's also a reminder for you to be more careful, right? I mean, because if you don't wear a mask,
That's
you
true.
don't pay attention. When you wear a mask, you sort of
That's true. That's true.
subconsciously keep a distance from the people around you, etc., etc. I think that helps.
But I mean, like pre-COVID, getting sick was just like, oh, you get sick and you get over it, right? So I mean, that's just, I don't know if we're ever going to return to that anytime soon. you know.
But
that's what
that
it
also
should-
probably
that's
because
what-
you spend a lot of time at home.
Now,
You probably spend more.
I mean,
You probably spend more time at home nowadays compared to before COVID, right? For sure.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. That's true. Yeah. But also, I'm older. I don't want to get sick, so it's just worse when I get sick.
That's the thing, right? It's a disease, and you're going to get sick. You can't prevent
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
And trying to
yeah.
like maintain this policy if no one is going to get COVID is just unrealistic.
Well, I mean, I think the policy is fine as long as the majority of the population's vaxxed, then it's fine, right?
Which most
And the
people
people who
are
are
at
not-
this point, though, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
correct.
like
Yeah,
every
and then-
country, every like the majority of the people, even the U.S., it's like 85% vaccination rates.
Yeah.
So that
I
argument
feel
doesn't really
it's
hold
yeah.
water anymore.
I feel we've given everyone a fair chance if they want to get vaxxed. If not, they're gonna get it and have it worse possibly. And I think that's their choice. We have to move on, right? So
No.
yeah, I'm done just talking about it and hearing about it. It's just people complain and rail about it too much. So
Yeah.
anyway, let's just
start.
Well,
let's just get started.
what was the discussion about cancel culture? Just curious.
You want to talk about that first?
We can talk about that first. I mean, whatever.
I mean, it's recorded anyway, so
Yeah.
you can do the official start. Why not? Yeah.
Hello, barbarians, and welcome to the 10th episode of the LLB podcast, Low Level Barbarians, from Asia, on Asia, with discussion and debate on trending topics. With us, myself, Alex, typically your host of EOA, man of the high ground, Dave Chang,
Hey guys.
and Jangan, the information super connector. Jangan, how are
Hello.
you?
Hello. Good.
Andrew G. Andrew G is coming. He's late, as expected, but we're
Stuck
starting
in
anyway.
traffic.
In somewhere in Mexico,
Yeah.
who knows what? Playing Narcos, who knows what
Yeah.
he's
No,
doing.
I mean, I've experienced the Mexico traffic, so it's understandable
Oh,
if he's
yeah.
indeed stuck in traffic.
Sure.
Oh, but
I'm
isn't
sure.
isn't he
Yeah.
in some like pueblo somewhere? So it's
Yeah,
more
yeah.
it's
He's
more
some-
likely his donkey cart broke down or something.
bro, you're bound to get canceled.
I don't. It's fine.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about our Mexican viewership. So,
I'm pretty. Yeah.
but anyway, what's first topic Jangan wanted to know about was cancel culture. I mean, me and you, Dave, we were talking about this. Started with the Joe Rogan topics, and I brought up the Whoopi Goldberg stuff. I think there's some nuance between the two we were talking about, right? So, in general, cancel culture been pretty prevalent since 2014, starting with the Me Too movement, right? That was when it was really about actual activism, actual protest and change, but kind of morphed into some kind of beast that people really understood over the past few years. And it's just used as a way to just deplatform people blindly, right? Just remove them from society, the conversation, especially in the digital space. And I don't know, I think, Dave, you had some viewpoints, especially what happened around Joe Rogan versus Whoopi Goldberg and some differences there. And I don't know, maybe later on we could also discuss wider, how does that look for what we see locally in Asia too?
I think you might want to explain to audiences here who Joe Rogan actually is.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, it depends on what circle you listen to. I feel like if you're listening to podcasts in general, you're going to know Joe Rogan, right? So he's probably the biggest podcast show in America, right? If not
In the
at this
world,
point,
he's the
right?
biggest podcast
in the world, right?
Yeah.
Right. So he has the widest audience. He's a very long format. He speaks to guests for an hour to a few hours, right? And they go. It feels very unscripted. Of course, I'm sure there's preparation and research done. It's like any production media company. You have a team behind it creating content and writers, right? So helping you do research. But probably for a large part, it's very genuine, authentic what he does. And he just talks to guests about various topics, very wide, right? And recently, he's been in hot water for misinformation. I think was the first one, right, where he was saying a lot of things about like COVID not being real and this kind of stuff. I didn't really get into the water with it. I feel like media is driving a lot of the conversation, which I'm trying to avoid noise. But I think that's what the gist is. And more recently, he was called out for using the N-word, but apparently he's been doing it for a long time across many episodes, right? So Spotify removed like 70 episodes of his. So what happened was the woke mob wanted to cancel him, right? There was this big attempt to deplatform him, but Spotify stood their ground. They kept him, and he's still around, I guess. And it just didn't really work. So I don't know, Dave. What is your take on this?
I mean, there's a couple things I think here with Joe Rogan specifically. So to provide some context, he's always been, as you say, sort of like this unscripted podcast format. I mean, he says he doesn't do any research, but that's actually a lie, or I think he's underselling himself. He actually does do a fair amount of research. If he has like an author
You have to.
or like a scientist on, he will read their work and he'll do some preparation, right? So I think that's a little bit disingenuous on his side. So just to build on your point, so what originally happened is he's always been sort of in the crosshairs of what probably called institutional media in the US, because he has these heterodox views on vaccination, right? So he's like most probably well known in the last year for saying that he took ivermectin, which is for when he had COVID, right? And then and then the story basically happened here is the establishment media painted him as sort of like a bit of a quack snake oil salesman. And the narrative that they sort of pushed was that ivermectin is a horse dewormer, and because he took this drug, therefore what he says is unreliable and can't be trusted. But what they kind of leave out is the fact that ivermectin is, first of all, he didn't take the horse version of ivermectin. There is a human version of ivermectin, so let's be really clear about this, right? And the fact that, so that's number one. Number two, he was prescribed ivermectin by his human doctor, so not a vet. And number three, ivermectin is actually one of the most prescribed medicines in the world for various ailments. So it's not completely unreasonable for him to be prescribed ivermectin. Also, he took ivermectin as part of a cocktail or regimen of other treatments. So he wasn't saying just take ivermectin and you'll cure COVID. So that's correct. So he's always been sort of at logheads with established media. And so what happened, I think, like in the last couple of months, is he had two guests on that were more on the controversial side in regards to the official US position on COVID vaccines. And that's sort of how this most recent cancellation or this most recent incident came out. So I think really the story here isn't necessarily about Joe Rogan himself in the sense that of his views. I think what you see in the US is that established media has been losing credibility and losing power for probably the last 8 years, I would say, right? If you look at sort of like, the polls about like whether people trust established media, they've been losing viewership and they've been losing trust for a long time. And I think this is ultimately about power, right? So Joe Rogan is the largest podcast in the world. I think the numbers he has are ridiculous. I think like each session gets like 20 million downloads or something, which far outstrips anything that like CNN, Fox, NBC is doing, right? And I think they've sort of reached this crisis moment now that Donald Trump is gone and they don't have the Donald Trump boost anymore, where they're doing everything that they can or anything that they can to sort of like reestablish themselves as an authority. And this character assassination on the number one podcast in the world, I think, is just sort of the tip of the first salvo, right? And I just want to say one more thing about before I let someone else jump in is, in regards to Joe Rogan specifically, the problem here isn't Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan is sort of in that elite category, sort of like a Dave Chappelle, where he's too big to cancel. Like you can't actually cancel him, right? Like even if Spotify were to kick him off, he could just go start his own platform somewhere else, and all his followers and all his viewers would go with him. It doesn't actually matter, right? The more pernicious thing is it's actually the second tier, third tier, fourth tier content creators, right? So if you set a precedent that the biggest podcaster in the world can be canceled, what does that say about everyone else who doesn't have nearly the reach that Joe Rogan does? Like you were joking, like we're going to get canceled, but that's like honestly the issue, right? Like if you sanitize and
further down the line,
it's secondary, second or third, down the line effects, right? If you say that Joe Rogan can be canceled, then that means anyone can be canceled, and that's like anything that anyone says is going to have to be this ultra sanitized institutional version of the narrative. And that's like the true pernicious danger of this entire incident, right? So thankfully he hasn't been, but I think people who are advocating for his content to be removed, for him to be canceled, have to really think about what the implications are for free speech, right? If you care about free speech. And so that's someone else talk.
Well, I think there's two interesting lines there in that one is talking about the machine of media, right? And then the other line is the whole free speech thing. Because even us being from where we are and the topics we have to adjust, we actually have to toe the line more carefully than other people probably. Whereas if we're in America, we probably could just be all let out loose and say whatever we wanted. But certain countries, if this ever catches on the radar, we do have to be more careful, right? So that I think people take that as a privilege that they don't realize that they have, or they don't really, they've never lived in another context, so they just can't appreciate it, right? And I think the piece about how the machine works, my question to that would be is like, do you think that's more towards optimizing revenue dollars, or I mean, I'm sure there's a part of it's going to be this, power play in politics and controlling narrative for players in part of the machine, but not running the machine, right? But I don't know. My gut feeling is that it's just maybe they're just following the system, and they need to get the ratings, they need to get the advertising dollars, so they follow what's going to do that, and it's a vicious cycle that they can't really get out of at this point, the way everything's built.
Well, it's both. I mean,
Yeah.
money and power are intrinsically linked in any society, in any culture, right? I don't think that makes a difference regardless of where you are. But yeah, I mean, the other interesting thing too is also like, if you think, to bring up Whoopi Goldberg. So Whoopi Goldberg also kind of got canceled a couple weeks ago because she said some fairly insensitive things about the Holocaust. Essentially, she said that the Holocaust wasn't about race, because it was, her logic is because it was white on white crime. And then she had to take a 2-week break from her show, The View, which I think is a little bit funny because The View is a fairly, how do I describe it? It's basically like the suburban wine mom version of the All In podcast, right? And so, they're actually pretty big advocates for what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, uniformity in opinions. So their show has definitely called for other people to be canceled, and so I think this is an interesting thing because it's a instance of like the monster eats its own. If you build this machine and you build this system, if you build these precedents, right? There's nothing to prevent those same tools to be used against you at one point, and I think that's also a danger, right? If what's really interesting was like many years ago, I think it was like 20, 30 years ago, the ACLU actually defended, I think defended the Ku Klux Klan, because it's a question of like, where does your priorities as a society lie, right? The priority stack of your social contract. And they're at that time, in this version of America, like 30, 40 years ago, the popular consensus was that free speech and the ability for people to engage in free speech and have dialogue was a higher priority than, say, preserving people's feelings, if I'm being a little bit simplistic. And I think, that dynamic has
Really
changed. Yeah, I'll send you the court case. ACLU defends. Like,
no. In that case, why can't you call a person fat when the person is actually fat?
You can't. This is the thing. In the US, you can't call people fat anymore.
No, but even in the past, you couldn't, right?
It was much more acceptable. It was much.
Well, yeah, I think, the bandwidth was more. Bandwidth was more, I think.
Oh, hello! Look at this guy. Look at this Tarzan
found
looking guy.
Indian Jesus.
How's it going, guys? Long time no see.
Good, man.
How are you, sir? Yeah.
Where are you now?
Still in Mexico City, CDMX.
Ah, okay, cool.
Wait, the last time we spoke,
But I think you've upgraded from basement to another basement.
This is true. Just keep moving basement. Whoever will host me and not realize the brown Indian guy is, underground, basically.
Yeah, they think you're the cleaner or something.
That's right.
You actually do look quite local. Yeah. So we're just talking about cancel culture, and I got fairly good, because I'm not been particularly following this. But I got really good lowdown from Alex and Dave about, what's going on in the US with the Joe Rogan, etc. So
and Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg as well.
The way I look at it, I see two parallels. From my sort of simplistic Chinese perspective. First is that the people around me, the intellectuals, they tend to draw lots of parallel in history and what they see with the movements in the West and the progressives and stuff. there's lots of people mentioning that reminds us of the Red Guards. I mean, the people who did the
Yeah.
Cultural Revolution in 1966
yeah.
to 1976, and I think at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, they wreaked lots of havoc, and they silenced people, and basically anyone who holds views which were not the same as theirs and would get persecuted by them. But what was funny and ironic and probably sad was many of them would become persecuted by other groups who thought that their views were too sort of unorthodox. So they created chaos. So yeah, so that's something that I mean, of course, in China, I think media is controlled, but I think many people have memories of the Cultural Revolution, and that this is something that they definitely do not want to get back to. So that parallel, I think, scares people to a certain extent. Another thing is that if you guys noticed at the beginning of COVID, there's this whistleblower doctor in Wuhan who passed away at the age of
Yes,
34.
correct.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he said this thing: there should be more than one voice in a healthy society. And that notion was basically, I mean, quite popular in China, as well as I think it was published by media globally. I think that's a good reminder of I mean, how do you keep a society healthy? Eventually, you need to have different voices. Um, the danger of having just one voice is that eventually everyone will become like Facebook, TikTok, right? I mean, you are only fed with things
Yeah.
you want to hear, and everything becomes even more polarized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting when I was researching this topic was that even in China, there is this idea of cancel culture and people are using it. But I think for China, it's very different in that it gets further politicized to actual consequence where whole companies are being boycotted. It becomes an east versus west kind of thing, right? If you say something bad about China, then you get punished by the Chinese consumer, and Chinese social media does take it very far. Whereas I saw in Southeast Asia, it tends to be more social issues. If you say something wrong, like a Singaporean blogger, getting canceled or tried to get canceled, as Philippines happened the same. I've seen similar, at least in Vietnam, something similar with call out culture, where there's one girl who wasn't supposed to be traveling when they had zero COVID policy, came back and brought COVID and started the next wave, right? There was like a big call out to that. So I think it's happening, and it's a little bit different flavors everywhere. So, but I think it's just more symptomatic of the problems we're seeing, and people are unhappy, and there's unrest with the big changes that are happening around them, right? And this is just the manifestation of it. So I don't know. What are you seeing from your side, Andrew? Anything of cancel culture on your radar these days?
I mean, I think there's two kinds of things we're talking about here, right? One is, the Chinese style, which is where governments cancel things because they want to have control over overall messaging that community is getting. What you're seeing in the US is like quite different, right? This cancel culture is coming from identity politics. It's this idea that absent some strong thing that people can rally themselves for, they tend to rally themselves around an identity. And when that identity feels threatened, um, they try to cancel it, right? They try to remove it, and a lot of this is like, it's spoken of in a very positive sense. Like there's a lot of pride around minority groups, but pride denotes some level of threat, right? You can only be proud of something if there's some level of threat to that thing, and when there's threat to it, then you are reacting with some kind of counter threat, and that's like the roots of a lot of this cancel culture. But I think the Joe Rogan situation is very different. Like
Well, no, I was just thinking because I talked to your partner Amy in her podcast, and the one comment she made about China was that now that China's like the second world largest power, soon to be the first world largest power, their national identity and pride also is very much tied to this. And a lot of the government canceling, for political reasons starts from social reasons too, because people feel attacked from a Chinese identity perspective too. So I would argue
And
it's not too far off from what's happening in the West.
yeah, I would agree with Alex, and I also think that I mean, the notion about Chinese government canceling things is not true. There are things which never existed, and what do we mean by the government is canceling that? They just don't exist.
I'm not sure if that was
Sorry.
a
No,
joke
the
or
government
not.
didn't cancel it. They just don't exist. Yeah.
Falun
I see
who?
what you did there.
Oh, I see.
I see
Yes.
what you did.
Okay.
Wow, nice. What cancel culture? Yeah, I think that's a cue to move on. No,
You remove
Like,
both sides of the
Smooth,
discussion.
Xiao Nan.
nothing to see here. But to be honest, the Joe Rogan thing is not about cancel culture, right? The Joe Rogan thing is this whole
So-
Yeah.
it's like controlling the messaging on
Yeah.
vaccination and what's the best kind of treatment for vaccination. So I'm not sure if
Okay.
it falls within the same ballpark.
So there was discussion I had with the propaganda official in China a few years ago. I think casual discussion. I was asking him about Google, why Google is not available in China, and his response is that Google's technology is not sophisticated enough to meet the requirements of the law of China, so therefore they can't.
Yeah, I probably different kind of sophistication, but I could actually believe that on a technical level, depending what the government wanted to do. Also, interestingly, did you see that Cambodia is erecting the same type of infrastructure for Cambodia? They have an internet massive firewall too now. I think that they're starting for probably the same purpose as China, right? I just saw it in the headlines this morning.
When I was in Iran a few years ago, and the funny thing about Iran is that they erected the wall as well, but the wall is not very tall, so you can basically download every VPN and get around it. So what I heard is that the government approached a few Chinese companies, including Baidu, to say that, hey, can you build a firewall for us? And because all those companies are US listed, nobody wanted to do it.
Interesting.
So in the end, they had a very low wall, and any VPN can bypass it. But if you look at war in China, it's just crazy. I mean, it's constant cat and mouse game between VPNs and the wall.
Which is it's mind blowing. Probably the amount of resources they have to put in to maintain that.
I mean, it's the same as the resources they put to keep COVID out, right? I mean, just that risk load is just crazy.
Do you think this kind of control can be maintained long term?
I don't know. I see the danger of that. So I think the population generally want order and want peace and want basically certain things to be taken care of by the government. But over the history, you would always know that. Sometimes there's a good leader and he does the good things for the people. But the thing is that because he demands absolute loyalty, and afterwards things become a little bit. He becomes misinformed and detached from reality. If you look at, I'm not drawing any parallel to what's happening present, but if you look at history, many of the emperors did great things when they were young, but became super stupid in their 50s and their 60s.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the whole thing. Like, democracy is extremely messy, especially during times of changes. But there are periods of time when central control happens and it just becomes highly efficient, right? But it just seems to be cycling through these different systems and ideologies as we continue to progress,
You can also draw parallels in the West, right? If you look at Roman history, right, occasionally they'll have dictators who assume all the power, and sometimes that passes back to how do you call those, the kind of like the elected rulers, and sometimes they don't. So it's
ironically, most of Western infrastructure of law, politics, systems derived from a dictator, Napoleon, right? He basically wrote the playbook for all of Western Europe, and which influenced America and what we're seeing today, right? But it all came from one guy who proclaimed himself emperor, but in the name of a republic, right? So it's kind of interesting.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on. So I think the corollary to that is crypto, right? We're talking about walls. We're talking about walls and people having control and dictatorships, but crypto, the decentralization, right? So Jangan recently, Crypto.com has come across the radar. Crypto.com, for everyone, according to the website, is a wallet. Their goal is to accelerate the world's transition to crypto, right? They have a bunch of other products. You could think Crypto.com like kind of banking products, but for crypto, right? It was initially founded in 2016 under Monaco, according to Wikipedia, and the company was renamed Crypto.com after they acquired the domain. They have a ton of users at this point, right? They recently did Super Bowl ads. Infamously, in January, they were hacked. They lost 15 million of Ether, and a lot of users saw suspicious activity on their accounts. But I think the reason why it's coming up is because they're having this big push for global expansion. Jangan, your company was probably pushed by them, or you had some dealings with Crypto.com, and you did a deep dive. Momentum Works team did a deep dive into crypto. What are you seeing, and what did you learn?
No, we're just doing a deep dive for a group of investors who like us, are too old to understand what's going on
Okay.
in Web3. So collectively we did an exercise about. I mean, we are from the consumer mobile internet age, right? So we're too old for
Yeah.
Web3, etc. So we did some study about the sector, the exchanges, the wallets, the NFT and stuff. And it's mind-boggling. I mean, the amount of activities there, the amount of different players that are doing different things in a sector, specifically about crypto.com. So there was one question that everyone was asking, right? How do they get so much money without institutional backing? They have a lot of money. If you look at the activities they do, the
That's true.
advertising
Yeah.
campaigns they
I
do.
mean,
Yeah.
crypto has gone up in the last few years, right? As long as they had money a few years ago, they probably would have just gotten the increase in that. And then with the way DeFi is working, a lot of these guys are also just staking that money. And if you're starting with 50 million, you're doing ridiculous returns on this. I mean, honestly, if you look at Series A or seed rounds between crypto startups versus Web2 startups, it's a joke, right? A Web2 startup struggles to get like a 10 million
Yeah.
round, and then you have crypto startups doing 50
Yeah,
million
correct.
on their seed round, and you're like, what? How does this even happen? There's just so much crypto
Right.
money chasing very few opportunities. So not surprising that they've gotten the trajectory.
Even still, yeah.
Yeah.
You guys probably know that the founders of crypto.com were the original gang of Insogo. So
I have a lot to
Yes.
say about this Jangan actually. 'Cause,
I want to hear this.
It's
David,
go.
you want me to go? You want me to go
Dave,
ahead?
you
I
have
can-
been
I can say a lot
silent.
about this.
Dave, you've been silent, and I want to hear this. Let's
Well,
go.
Okay,
Shitting
so
on Insogo?
I have some firsthand experience with Chris Mazurchak, who is the CEO of Crypto.com. So as John Gon had previously alluded to, Chris's story is he founded this deal website in Hong Kong called Be Crazy at the time, right? And then I think this was in 2014. Yeah, around 2014 he hooked up with Patrick Grove and they did a deal where they took Be Crazy, they took Patrick Grove's daily deal website, which was called Dealmates at the time, and then they bought Living Social's Southeast Asia assets, which were predominantly in Sogo. So that's how I come to the picture because I was managing part of Living Social's Southeast Asia business. And so what they did was they did a roll-up deal and they IPO'd that on the ASX under this brand called the iBuy Group. So there was some, there's some. This is all public record, by the way. So everyone
Yeah,
can
I
just go
remember
Google this information. There's nothing, no secrets here. And so there were some questionable tactics in the IPO itself, right? So number one, they had represented that they had actually acquired all the assets before the listing, when in actuality they were using the proceeds from the listing to actually do the acquisition. So that that's that's questionable there. And then essentially what happened was, they raised a significant amount of money. Actually, I think like all told, they had raised around like 80 million USD, and they had operated for about a year. But essentially, what happened is about like a year and a half into it, they decided the operations were no longer tenable. So what they did was they basically went out and they shut down all the offices overnight, locked the doors, locked employees out, disappeared, didn't pay any of the vendors, didn't pay severance pay. And then there was still about, I think at the time, there's like 12 to 14 million AUD sitting in the corporate bank accounts in Australia. And theoretically, if you go into liquidation, right, it should, be, that should be, the debt holders should get all that. And it's been, I believe, it's 2022 now, so it's been 8 years. I don't think anyone has been paid out, and that cash balance that's sitting in that bank account has just been suddenly depleting every year for some excuse called admin fees. And when Chris was questioned about this, his excuse was something along the lines of, "I'm just the CEO. I had no power. C'est la vie." So
sounds very similar to the Groupon story in China.
what's that story?
Yeah. Oh, when everyone knows this story, this is all public. When Groupon China was shutting down, they basically did very similar tactics of locking the doors, hiding in the offices. But the difference is that the Chinese mobbed the managers there instead, and they were stuck in the office for a long time.
Yeah, they were held hostage by their staff.
Okay,
so don't do that in China.
That's his past, though, Dave. Like, what do you think about what he's doing right now? Do you think it carries through?
Look, I mean, I only have interacted with Chris like a handful of times, right?
Right.
But I don't want to really get into like character assassination stuff here, but just between you and me, like I feel like someone's character is a character, right? Like if you're going to do something
Yeah.
like that, it doesn't.
Well, look,
No, but I'm
I'll say
serious.
this. I will say this though. Like I have come across unscrupulous types too, but they somehow get recycled back into the system and can rebrand themselves and come out appearance-wise looking squeaky clean and keep getting higher and higher, better jobs in more well-funded companies. I've avoided some high-profile companies. I knew some people were involved with them, but these companies are some of the biggest names you will know, and it becomes very weird, that they are seen as a pillar in a community when that you've heard some really weird stuff about certain people. But it's possible in Southeast Asia that these people can turn a leaf, get back into it. Whether they change, I don't know. Right? That's that. You want to allow people for growth and change for sure, but it gets kind of weird that you still have to run in the same circles and may have to deal with them one day too, right? And this, right? So,
Yeah.
I spoke with a bunch of crypto insiders, and basically I got a very good lowdown about each of the exchanges, each of the crypto financial services companies, each of the crypto asset
Yeah.
management companies, how they exactly make money. So specific to crypto.com, they did ICO, I think under the previous company name back in 2017. I think raised about 27
Monaco.
something,
Yep.
$1 million. And the crypto traders I've spoken to are saying that they are probably amongst the most aggressive in crypto trading, and using some of the trading tactics which might be not allowed if you trade in regulated market, but everyone does it. They just seem to be doing better than and more aggressively compared to others.
Okay. Well, I mean, the other line you could say is that you could look at the track record, from Dave's story to and Sogo to, I mean, there's a lot of, well, I mean, Sogo probably wasn't. I mean, they couldn't compete, right? But I don't know if there was any mismanagement there.
I mean,
it might be a similar story.
Alex, I think back in Rocket days would have like discussions about two different profiles or personalities, right? I mean, some people are just more suitable for trading. Some people are just more suitable, sort of building organization with people around them and keeping the people loyal and so being a good people person.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple things here I will say, right? I do think it's not a bad thing that in the industry people are allowed to fail and to come back and reinvent themselves,
correct.
right? That they're not punished for a lack of
That's
success or whatever. That's not what I was trying to say, but I do think, I think we talked about this before. Ultimately, there should be a little bit more accountability in how we all conduct ourselves in our industry. And then I think about the crypto space in general. Like I found like the recent events in the crypto markets to be super interesting, because for me, this is almost like the emperor has no clothes moment, right? And if you think about the promise of crypto, right? It's supposed to be like decentralized, and it's supposed to be like insulated from what's happening in the general ecosystem and in the general markets, right? So in times of uncertainty where there's high interest rates, or high inflation in the US, we have sort of like geopolitical issues in Ukraine and Taiwan. If crypto is supposed to like be true to its promise, where it's supposed to be like this flat or hedge against these centralized issues, and you would expect the prices to be all going up, right? But in actuality, what you see is basically everything has taken a nosedive, and I think it's just interesting because it's sort of proving that this is truly just like a very speculative asset.
Well,
and a lot of people holding this may not necessarily be the believers that they say they are.
Yeah, I think the maturation of crypto as an asset class does get there eventually, but what you're seeing is just the second wave of noise getting cleaned up. Now, this is a very important point where I think that there's enough institutional money, enough belief in this, that where ideally this should be the floor. Hopefully, if the value tanks further, it's a bit more questionable, but I think it's harder for prices to tank even further. At this kind of support level, it's just now. As more people get to it and better infrastructure happens, then it just becomes more what you're talking about, where there's more nodes on the network and it's more of a store of value. It's less, then it's a different kind of asset class where people could use it to hedge and this kind of thing. But I think it's just too early, maybe. I know that's the way I'm seeing it, at least. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree. No one cares about crypto. Okay,
No.
let's move on.
Well, Andrew thinks does, but I think Andrew's frozen. Like, look at his face. He hasn't moved.
No, I'm
He
here.
has that same, he has that same.
Okay. I'm sure. That's how I was.
Oh, you're there.
You're
Okay,
here.
sorry.
Oh, there you are. There you are. Okay. Yeah.
You had this
were frozen
really,
for a second.
upset-looking look on your face for the last
This
5
crypto
minutes.
thing, man. I just don't
Am
know.
saying
I
something
just
to
don't know
offend him?
where to jump in. You know, like there's just too much going on here, and like, I don't know. It's an exciting space. I mean,
It's very noisy. It's a very noisy space.
no, it's not just noisy. You know, what's interesting is like take Crypto.com, the one that we're talking about. They have a 500 million growth fund, like a VC fund that they just launched last year. You've got, I think Sequoia has 2.2 billion right now. A16Z has their own fund. I think in total you had like 30 plus billion in terms of VC funding. FTX alone has a 2 point something billion dollar fund. Like I just think the space is heating up, and it's hard to really gauge where it's going. And commenting about it is almost like speaking about the internet in 1985, right? Like sure, the internet was slow, and you know you couldn't send things over. And then even in the early 90s, it also sucked, right? You had GeoCities and pixelated cats. Like it wasn't very good, right? Remember downloading a JPEG? You had to wait 30 minutes before you had the full thing, right? What we have today in terms of like TikTok, social media, the way we use these phones all the damn time, that's an evolution that took 30 years to go. And so to comment about it without fully like the rails are being built now, there is some level of idea of what it's going to look like, but I don't think we really understand where it's going to go. I think it's something that will definitely change the world. But it's really hard to gauge like where exactly it's going to go right now, right? But there's a bunch of innovations already, like just in terms of just in terms of it being a commodity, just in terms of its ability to do tracking, its ability to store data, have contractual agreements on an algorithmic basis. I mean, all of us here have invested in some level of like crypto startups. So I think like it's hard to really gauge where it's going to go, but it's going to blow up. And the thing is like these guys are just betting really hard on it, and I mean I wish them luck.
I do agree with this notion, right? I mean, we see things. I mean, you guys, if any of you have been involved in enterprise tech, you will know this Gartner's hype curve or whatever that name is called. So basically, you see things, and when a new technology happens, and things get hyped up, and most of the hype will die, most of the companies will die as well. But eventually, because of all these actions, I mean, certain applications get hold, and they actually fundamentally transform tech and sometimes people's lives. So definitely, and it's a bit hard to bet at this moment which one will work out, but definitely something will come out of this sooner or later.
All right, let's move on. So Jangan and I were talking last night. CSEA company, the stock is in free fall, fast approaching IPO levels at this rate.
Do we sell or do we hold, guys? I am. Yeah. Sorry, continue. Do we sell or do we hold? Do we sell or do we hold? Go on, Alex. Sorry.
Or do you add?
Yeah.
Or do you add?
Yeah.
Do you
Diamond
reverse,
hands.
you reverse pyramid.
Diamond hands.
Lambos to the moon.
Okay, continue, Alex. Sorry, we completely interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Free Fire was
Is it
banned
free
in
fall?
India. Right. So India
missed an opportunity for pun there. Come on, Alex. You got to hit it with the puns.
Okay, sorry. Well, that's why you're here, Andrew. That's why you're here. You're here to help us. Okay, so but India has banned Tencent's Xriver, Garena's Free Fire, NetEase's Onmyoji, Arena, Astracraft, 50 more apps with apparent links to China, according to the TechCrunch article that we were reading. This has just been going on for a while, right? So this is based on national security grounds. So which is Free Fire, this battle royale game has over 40 million of its 75 million global monthly active users in India, according to App Annie, if you believe the data. Even plus or minus 10 million users, it's still a lot of user base coming from India, which is now cut off from that. And this is a really big thing, because I think C is also looking at launching Shopee in India, or at least they're testing the water. So how does this kind of play out, right? And the way I kind of see this is that, since the colonial times of the UK, and then them coming into the interwar period of coming off the gold system, ever since post-World War II, they've been very protectionist in mindset and very populist driven, right? And to me, this is like the extension of this, and it's on a digital front in the technological sense, where they're trying to protect India interest. At least that's the narrative, right? And in doing so, they have hurt themselves for a long time. A lot of the manufacturing companies in India are not productive at all. It's very hard to penetrate in terms of export. If you want to export to India, right, they have very high tariffs. But of course, they're willing to take FDI. But this has been the nature of India for a long time. The people in the past year, since 2014, when Modi took over as prime minister, say it got worse. But it's been the trend for a long time, for many, many decades, as India kind of integrated into the world from post World War II. So, and I think that this is just continuing this kind of trend, and it's probably largely led by either populism or these kind of old ideologies that are stuck in the system. So, I don't know. What's your take on this? How is this affecting C, the company itself, and what do you guys think for the India ecosystem?
I just want to call out something before we get into the details. It's kind of crazy that this is happening 6 months later. Like 6 months ago, we were talking about the same thing happening in China clamping down on gaming, and now it's happening all over again in India. And I wonder if this is like a pattern that you're going to see globally among these developing economies that have some level of like strong central control or the ability to actually like crack onto these
Yeah.
apps. In India's case, obviously, there's a bit of a nationalistic sentiment as well. I wonder if it's a bit of a support for the nascent like gaming um, community in India. But on
Yeah.
the flip side, clearly they've both decided as an objective function that games are poisonous to children, and therefore they need to do whatever is possible to remove them from these kids, right? I think it's a pattern you're going to see a
Is that
lot
the
of.
narrative for India?
I mean, to some extent, if you read the blogs and like what people are saying, that's generally the case. And I
Hmm.
I think it's the same narrative for the both of them, and arguably the same discussions are happening in Brazil and Mexico and a whole bunch of other places. And if you have a few other countries with like plus 100 million populations do the same thing, oof, it's going to be rough, right? Um, what's funny is it's coming from developing markets, not developed markets. So it's a very and theoretically, it can only come from developing markets. Like it has to be markets where they do believe that this is really that harmful, but they believe that there's a strong ability for the governments to actually step into individuals' lives and actually take control and change these things, right? Um, I think it just means that gaming companies need to tread carefully. They can't get too big, and they can't like it's a catch-22, right? You win by engagement, and right now, what has happened is we've created a whole group of games that isn't about quality and depth. It's purely about how much time you spend on it. They've just taken the social media narrative and expanded on it. Basically, it's TikTok on steroids, it's Facebook on steroids, it's addictive, it's dopamine inducing, and you're on that thing just doing repetitive actions over time, right? Um, and
And it's the most
and
profitable too.
exactly. I mean, the fact that it's crazy that these games are free and you buy add-ons and people just spend money on them, right? And they figured out how to monetize it and they built marketplaces around it as well. And so, like, this business model is incredible, but this business model, just like social media and the hate that Facebook is getting, is based off the idea that individuals are weak and their dopamine can be easily hacked. And therefore, if you have a tool that can hack that dopamine, you make money off it, right? And that's like kind of where China went with banning them. That's where India is going with this. And I think we're just going to see this pattern again and again. I think the one warning here is if you're a B2C startup, like stray away from trying to get people hooked for the sake of being hooked, right? Because eventually someone's going to catch up and they'll treat you like
Well,
a casino.
if this narrative is true, why isn't more social media regulated then?
For the same
Well,
reason, fatty food isn't banned or alcohol isn't treated as badly as other drugs, right? Humans
Mm.
are short-sighted, right? Like alcohol is probably the worst drug that we know,
Yeah.
yet we legalize it and we
So
legalize
it's an
more
easy target.
it's an easy target. It's not social yet, right? It hasn't been embedded yet, and it's easy to like. Also, like in India's case, it's also about garnering votes, right? How many parents can you convince by saying we took that game away from your child, and now your child's going to be a better student
Mm.
thanks to us, right? So there's a right like really nice way of pandering to the electoral
Culturally, it makes sense. Yeah.
culturally it does make sense, especially when you believe in authoritarian governments and you say like, oh, this is my lord and leader, look at this guy, he's doing all these incredible stuff. And if you look at like the BJP and like how they presented themselves over the last like few years, it's a very strong arm government that repeatedly tries to show that they don't give a f about any sort of cultural values. They just want to do what they believe is right for Hindutva, for Hinduism, and it's like a continuous thing that they've been doing, right? Like they've just been like continuously like breaking cultural ties, and I don't want to get into the details of India, but like, you know, this strong arm, iron fist, we control things, we make things better for you personality is just right within their veins.
I mean, Andrew, I'm curious, like this narrative about them banning Free Fire because it's sort of like a general crackdown on gaming. Why haven't they banned like American publishers?
Good point. Good point. I mean,
Maybe is it
the easy argument there is you just do a ranking
is it
on Google Play Store and you see what's number 1 to 10 and then you ban those,
Sure.
right? That's the answer you're going to get, and it so happens that they're all Chinese owned,
Yeah.
right? There's no Niantic game there. There's
Well,
no
yeah.
game there. I mean,
well,
again,
it could be the reciprocation element, right?
no, but it's free to play versus pay to play, right? Most American games you have to pay. There's no way you're getting free games. I mean, unless I don't know who owns PUBG.
Well, I mean, like Indian companies can set up. I mean, Indian companies can set up in the U.S. and collect data on U.S. consumers. I don't know. Is it very socialist in that they want it to be fair play on both sides, or I don't know.
Well, I mean, so this is interesting, right? So did you? I don't know much about this particular organization, but in December of 2021, this trade organization called the India Confederation of All India Traders, the CAIT, filed a complaint against Shopee that it had essentially illegally entered the market. And I'll send you guys the link to this later. But and then they were saying there were questions about who essentially the nationality of the true owners of Shopee, and the way that it had made it sound was this is both one sort of like a populist, as you said, like sort of a protectionist angle, and also sort of like a nationalist angle. I don't know if you guys have been following, but there's been sort of like a series of these incursions or like skirmishes on the border of India and China in I think it's like the Nepal Kashmir region or the Himalaya region, where essentially their soldiers will get into fistfights in the mountains, and there's actually been some casualties from this. So I'm just curious with like, yeah.
I think Dave, the same confederation you've talked about and has done multiple protests and open letters or whatever against Amazon. So if you look at some of the restrictions that that Amazon received in China, many of them came as a result of the strong industrial actions from these guys. And I think was it beginning of last year or the year before? Bezos was in India. I think maybe the year before was India, and these guys were holding protests everywhere.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, I don't believe any of these organizations are sort of ground-driven, sort of democratically elected leaders trying to represent the interest of the traders. I think they are driven by big interests behind them. I don't know what these interests are. Yeah. But if you look at the C's case, right? Shopee is trying to get into India, and I think they have reason trying to do that because they look at the biggest e-commerce players, Amazon, Flipkart. They're doing what, a million, 1.2 million orders a day, which for Shopee is like it's like a fraction of what we do in Indonesia. So so they see opportunity, and also I think they recognize that in India you can't do cross-border shipping goods from China because there are few companies who have tried that. They have all been banned or harassed by the customs. Of course, they have great tactics.
Cost is too high too.
The cost, I mean, for certain categories still makes sense. But
I guess so.
but the thing is that India doesn't allow foreign companies to do retail. So basically, if you have to sell it wholesale into India and find a proxy to sell it. Yeah. So
well, that's what happened with Jabong, right? With Rock Internet's first generation fashion companies. It was such a weird structure where they had two entities set up for the fashion e-commerce for India, where and there's a line down the warehouse where that one company for handling logistics, and the other side was, the e-commerce arm, and they had to pass it to each other.
I think Amazon did something similar, right? They have local proxies to be the master seller on the platform. And there's this company called Cloud Factory from China, which passes the account through a local proxy, and when they're doing the cross border. But back to Shopee, so they see that the market is big in terms of volume that has not been exploited fully by the companies. And if you look at the traction Meesho has been getting, and so Shopee is saying that, hey, what Meesho is doing, we can do the same thing. Why can't we take part of this market? But the problem is that, I mean, when it comes to this kind of big countries, you always have like two types of logic, right? And first is the business logic, and the second is the political logic. So it works in China, it works in India as well, right? I mean, certain things that Tencent reduced its stakes in C, so basically sort of relinquish the control. I mean, or whatever potential control they might have. I mean, I think that might be enough to convince the regulators in China that C doesn't have Chinese control. But when you try to convince someone who just believes that you have Chinese control, and for you to argue that case is extremely difficult. So I don't see that they will have even if Shopee manages to penetrate into India. I think politically, I think they're going to have a hard time.
Any final comments before we move on to the last topic?
Do you hold? Do you sell? Do you add? So what's your sense?
Oh yeah, we haven't answered the question. So wait, let's dive into SE in particular, right? So it's been on a free fall these last few weeks, and what does everyone think? So there's pressure from multiple ends, right? Tencent is coming out. You got Free Fire being banned in India. You've got questions about their international expansion strategy and the ability to finance debt. So how does everyone feel about the stock and what we should do with it?
Well, there's one thing that me and Dave talked about was that their cash cow gaming seems to be in trouble, and they need to fix that. So because that kind of underpins the thesis we talked about a few episodes before, where that they're in a stronger position with lower cost of capital to keep throwing investments. And maybe I don't know, maybe they kind of had this foresight, which is why they raised so much money, was because they knew there might be some headwinds like this, right? So if that is removed out of the equation, they're in a tough position, but they are well capitalized, but they have to really make e-commerce work, right? But that's very long tail still. So I mean, one argument is that if e-commerce is the way forward, they still have a long way to drive more value, and then it's a long hold, right? The other end of it is like, I don't know, depends on your horizon of investment, but it's maybe they're not gonna be able to pull it off. Maybe they run out of money or this kind of thing, or they can't print as much money on the public markets, right? So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Dave, you want to go first?
I mean, I think this is ultimately a question of for me, it's like a question of catching a falling knife, right? You're never going to catch the falling knife, and I think it's foolish for anyone to try and do so. For me, actually, I think at these prices, this is something that I would actually look at, because ultimately so my thesis is still the same, right? I believe in sort of the Southeast Asia growth story. I believe that this will be a huge region going forward, and I think that of the companies that are operating in the space, Shopee is still, in my opinion, probably the best position out of all the major players, right? So if that is your thesis, then I think this is something that it's getting to the point where I think I would seriously look at it, right? But the question is do you buy now, or do you buy in another 4 or 5 months when maybe it'll go a bit lower? I think that question is probably something that you probably shouldn't bother if you're just a normal investor and not sitting here and trying to trade something.
I mean, relative to the peak, I'd say it's good. It's good enough, even if it drops further. If you think long term your thesis is correct, I think it doesn't matter too much.
So do you think there's a possibility here that banning Free Fire is just to stop the expansion of Shopee into India? And then
I'd buy that story more than the narrative gaming. Yeah,
that was my original.
Could be right.
thought,
and so then you think all the other games are just collateral damage, or warning shots? They're like Tencent. These are warning shots. Because India is their biggest market, right, for Free Fire? Is it? It's India, then Brazil, Mexico.
Not the biggest market in terms of revenue.
Yeah.
Not the biggest in terms of revenue. In terms of users, the biggest. Yeah.
Users, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, entirely possible. Huh?
Go ahead, Jengan.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Jengan.
Is there a delay of what Andrew is saying, or I mean,
slight delay?
Slight
delay.
Yeah,
I think
I'm actually on the moon. It takes 8 minutes. Sorry, Jagan.
Can you see the Great Wolf on the moon?
The American flag isn't really here, by the way. Just letting you know.
Please, don't pander. Don't pander.
Yep. So the way I look at it, they are very ambitious. They want to conquer all the markets, and where I mean, they believe they have the opportunity because competitors in many markets are weak. Um, so strategy-wise, I don't see any problem with that. I mean, if I look at some of the investments they have been doing in Southeast Asia, invest in logistic infrastructure, invest in food delivery, I think these are fundamentally good investments because pure sort of marketplaces, e-commerce, they're not going to be very defendable because Lazada will always be there. I mean, Alibaba is not going to say that we're going to shut down Lazada or whatever. So so they're making the right strategic moves. The question is all this expansion, all this investment needs lots of money, and Free Fire is probably now the only like a strong cash generator for them. So people have been talking about whether they have another blockbuster coming out, or 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 like NetEase, right? I mean, create like a series of mediumly successful games which collectively generate lots of cash for them to fund all this growth. The problem at the moment is they can't. So they would be at the mercy of the market sentiments, and now the sentiment is definitely bad. So I'm holding, but I'm not adding. And the thing is
Yeah.
that we look at adding, we look at buying. You don't necessarily need to buy at the bottom if your thesis is long term, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Wait
Yeah.
wait until the Q4 results to be announced, because there are some speculations that e-commerce growth is slowing down in Indonesia, etc., etc. And wait until you get that clarity and make a decision. Ultimately, I mean, if you don't need to be at the bottom to to,
Yeah.
to buy it.
What 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 is your guys' take on the business model for these kind of gaming companies? Because it's highly performance marketing driven, right? And we're seeing the performance marketing landscape shift with Facebook and Apple's privacy. Do you think that's going to affect these kind of gaming acquisition strategies, or they could just spread it to other channels now that are just as maturing, like TikTok? Or
Yeah.
what do you guys think?
I think this particular topic vis-a-vis gaming is it's basically Apple's move to capture more of the advertising dollars, right? So before,
Mhm.
most of the app install budgets were going through Facebook because, so for those who don't know,
Correct.
basically, Apple changed the privacy settings where basically they only allow first-party tracking on their platform. And so this has actually significantly hurt Facebook's bottom line. As I saw in their like Q4 announcement or whatever the most recent announcement was, they were saying that this has cost them $10 billion in top line gross revenue, and a lot of that is from the gaming sector, right? So ultimately, I think in the competition between the Apple and change and tracking, it's more of a Facebook question. I think what's much more interesting with this is what's happening in the US around, actually, sorry, in the EU and in Korea around Apple's App Store fees, right? So there's been a lot of regulatory pushback about how much
Yeah.
Apple is charging. So they're charging 30% of all transactions that go through. And so in Korea, I think they recently just passed a new law stating that the App Store has to offer an alternative payment option that's not through the
Yes.
App Store, right? And I think similar legislation is going through, or similar conversations happening in the EU right now. So I think actually, for the gaming industry, this might be a huge boom, because if you don't have to pay a 30% tax on your revenue, then it's a huge
Well,
windfall
you
for them.
could just you take that margin and you put it back to the same machine, which is just performance marketing to get more user
Exactly.
growth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you don't think it has the like acquisition strategies will change for this business model then?
I mean, the acquisition strategy will change, of course, because the platforms you use will be different. Instead of going through Facebook,
Yeah.
you have to
Right.
go through people with first-party data, so they'll be like Google and
Yeah.
Apple and whoever else, right? But I think because we're
Mhm.
talking about like gaming as a sector as a whole, I think like
Yeah.
they're
Sure.
well positioned at least in the near future.
Yep.
I don't know if they use a lot of performance marketing. My theory is like a lot of these games require a critical mass of friends, and so it actually is quite highly organically driven. Because like with Free Fire, PUBG, these free-to-play games, you're trying to play with your friends, and so in the beginning, it's a lot of performance metrics and it's a lot of ad networks. Um, but so let's break this down, right? First of all, when it comes to performance, for pure mobile installs, ad networks on Android are actually superior to Facebook and Google metrics, because like you like one, there's a lot of earned ads that they have. So if you have Shopee, you can show installs to other apps, vice versa, right? So basically, like as long as you have an ecosystem of of apps, you can move people between those apps a bit easier. That's technically like a lot cheaper than using other kinds of paid media. Number one. Number two is like they have like very strong networks with other kinds of apps that are popular for other reasons, whether they're games or like fancy clocks or like weather apps or whatever, and people use these things and you get those installs. So there's cheap installs coming from these networks which are outside of Facebook and Google, and they're primarily an Android market, right? Android tracking is not affected by the Apple news, right? If you think about where Free Fire,
No,
PUBG, and
correct.
all these games play, they're mostly 90% Android markets. Then you break it down to another level, which is how do they actually grow and where are they right now? In the first 2 years, maybe there's a lot of performance marketing, but once you reach a critical mass, like the people that are playing these games are mostly 12 to, I don't know, 24-year-olds. I'm just like throwing a number there, right? Like I don't know where the cutoff happens, but I assume if you have a job and you're 24, you're probably not playing too much Free Fire. But if you are, then well, let's just say 12.
You'd be surprised.
You'd be
I would be
surprised. Yeah,
surprised.
you'd be
This is
surprised
true. This is
actually.
true. I'm seeing surprise faces just in this podcast, so maybe I'm very wrong. Is that, let's say 12 to 35. Let's go with 35. Right.
Okay, that's
So
probably more accurate.
so
Yeah.
so um so basically, I think
Well,
like in those ranges, people
yeah.
are just like 8 out of your 10 friends play it. You have to be like playing it as well, right? So it's just like organic installs at some point.
Well, yeah. My thought is that there's a life cycle of profitability for each game, and then by and large, performance drives all of it. But I think if you get a viral factor, and it just lowers your customer acquisition costs, right? So, but by and large, my understanding of talking to people who had to execute on the marketing side for like games and stuff, it was like the main engine of growth is always performance marketing. It just of course of all performance marketing, it just becomes less and less effective over time, right? So but I don't know, I've never done it myself, so maybe you're right. So,
Nope.
Yep.
What's next?
okay, all right, last topic: Delivery Hero numbers. Delivery Hero earlier in this month, well, we saw a really big drop in share price. They lost, how much did they lose, right? It was something like
30%.
a quarter of its value.
Yeah.
It's a quarter of its value to 50%, maybe by now
I
it's
think
50%.
I think 40% or something. Yeah.
40%. Yeah. They disappointed on profitability outlook. I mean, the larger this, because coming off COVID tailwinds, things are opening up again. Their revenue was up, but the question is always of profitability, right? The cost was they had a lot of issues. So I guess the big question for this, in terms of Delivery Hero and Food Panda, all the ones that we know, right? Is this due to them investing in the gorilla space? Is this really a justified investment, or are the actual economics just not healthy? And is that indicative of the actual share price? So I don't know. What is your guys' take on the Delivery Hero numbers? Jangan, why don't you tee us off from here?
Okay. We actually did some, assessment about food delivery market in Southeast Asia, and we do that every January. So we publish the
Month and
numbers.
works, right?
Yes, we publish the numbers. Can I share screen actually?
Can try.
Yeah.
We can try. Yep. So basically, we published some numbers beginning of the year. What's interesting in Southeast Asia, and by the way, we're fairly confident with numbers we got. I mean, we spoke with lots of people on the ground and did lots of sort of approximation of data and the calibration. So we eventually came out with the market shares and numbers that everyone find acceptable. So our sense is that first Grab is half the market. I think 7.6 billion GMV. Food Panda has grown by 30% to 3.4 billion, and 36%, I think, to from 2 billion. So basically everybody's growing, and then of course there's Shopee Food. What we find interesting is that the way that everyone drives growth is different. So the way you look at Grab, I mean, they are almost sort of I wouldn't say confining, but they are very, very well positioned in the premium market in all the cities. I mean, all the capital cities in Southeast Asia where we did the consumer interviews, and the middle class and above consumers almost always prefer Grab to their competitors. But then we look at the market share in many countries, especially Malaysia, where actually Food Panda is actually bigger than Grab. So that does not really correspond. So what is happening? And they will look at Food Panda's coverage. This is interesting. They basically went to all the cities in all the countries. In Thailand, they have coverage in all the 77 provinces. Before Lion Man had coverage in to that extent. In Malaysia, they are in basically all the towns. And I was in Langkawi in December, and in a small village called Kampung Ulu, Malacca, something like that. There are four food panda riders there delivering food. So that strategy, of course, gives them sort of volume coming from different places. I think they're also in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. So very very top line driven growth. And as a result, I think the volume is probably high, but my question is that whether this approach is defendable, right? When you are available everywhere, but in the capital cities, you are behind your competitor. Yep. So this is what we did. In Vietnam, of course, I mean small market, but Delivery Hero has Baimin, which captured quite a bit of market share from Shopee Food, the long-term dominant player there. In the Philippines, they are more or less at the same level with Grab. In Malaysia, they are ahead of Grab. In Thailand, because of that incident of firing a employee, right, who went to the protest, they actually did lose quite a bit of market share because of that. But also because towards the end of the year, Thailand launched these 50-50 programs that the government will subsidize half of the amount that the consumers pay to food delivery. So Grab and Lineman got plugged into the system, and Foodpanda didn't. No idea why, but I guess knowing how the tech is done is probably because they didn't have enough time to prioritize the government appointed payment method. But here's the market position. Nobody's making a profit yet, and people are still going for. I mean, if you look at all the players, the EBITDA margin is improving, but nobody's making a profit yet. But even if they do make a
This is
profit,
GMV
this
both
would be a
delivery and
low
logistics,
margin.
right? So when you say Grab is 7.6, are you adding both or is it just delivery?
Just the food delivery. I didn't
Wow.
include groceries.
So
I actually
Grab
excluded
is
groceries.
double of Food Panda for food?
I wouldn't be surprised, right? Grab has Indonesia.
For those listening,
And-
7.6 billion versus 3.4 billion. Grab versus Foodpanda.
Gotcha.
But of course, we look at the numbers from Delivery Hero. They will include the numbers across Asia, right? That will include Korea, Hong Kong,
Yeah.
and Taiwan,
Which are
and of
massive.
course Pakistan and Bangladesh. It was interesting that they had announced the numbers for Korea in 2020, not in 2021. In 2020, Korea was doing 12 billion euros GMV.
Wow.
So that year was 70% of Delivery Hero's Asian business, and if our number is accurate, the Korea share of Delivery Hero's Asian business is more than 70% for 2021.
Did you look at the rate of growth? Because I mean, we're just looking at Shopee, which really came up on the radar in the past year, and it's already doing as much as Lineman, which has been around for years in Thailand, right?
Yes, and I think Shopee is doing about 1 million orders, probably more, in Indonesia a day.
Wow.
So similar to what Amazon does in e-commerce in India, by the way.
In India. But also, what's very interesting is that it just shows that this is not going to be a very winners take all market, because look at Deliveroo. They've been surviving so long in Singapore, and it just means that the margin will get smaller and smaller over time for all these players as things converge, right?
Deliveroo has been losing market share. I think I remember the last year was about 23-24%, and this year it dwindled to 12%. And on the road, visibly, you see fewer Deliveroo riders. One thing they have been doing to compensate this is to I think they invested a lot in relationships with some of the good restaurants. I think they probably reduced the cohort of restaurants they have, but they really invest in making sure that restaurants which do work with them and get the best out of it. So, but you never know, because you know that I think Delivery Hero has a stake in Deliveroo, so some consolidation is always possible.
Well, I think that strategy works really well in a market like Singapore, because everyone is quite affluent, and like if you look at cities like in New York, they don't use a lot of the elites don't use the mass aggregators. They'll pick the ones with the best restaurants, with the best quality, with the best kind of experience. So, and there's room to kind of segment those kind of things in a more mature market. Whereas maybe other markets, mass aggregation is the correct model to go in the short term until things kind of catch up economically, right? So look at different flavors possibly. So yeah.
We actually did some simple analysis about the cities in different countries, how they are different, and because one question which we got asked a lot is that why is DoorDash doing so well? And one thing is that they are actually doing a lot of. They're not competing as much as their competitors in New York, where it's very dense, where you can have the volume.
Yeah, correct.
But in US, you have lots of people in suburbs, and during COVID, you can have a high order sizes for dinner that people are ordering. So that's a segment that they managed to penetrate, and that same segment probably doesn't exist in most part of Asia that we live in.
Yeah, correct. So Jiangan, what does your logic tell you with them missing their earnings estimates? Is this them investing, or is it just not strong economics?
I think they've been told by investors to focus on the top line. So all this growth into the smaller cities, into more markets, it's geared towards top line growth. And if you look at what happened in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and both Grab and Gojek were actually quite restrained in promotions in the food delivery sector, because they were gearing towards IPO, and they learned from WeWork. So they were trying to rationalize, but that was a time when Foodpanda came in aggressively acquiring the users, which is a rational strategy, because at that time when you try to acquire additional users, the CAC is low, the customer acquisition cost is low, so you end up having lots of users. But the question is that how do you build something sustainable out of that? Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Okay. So I don't know. Does anyone have a take on that then? Do you think? Because it feels like a lot of these food players are trying to push into the 50-minute deliveries that we talked about earlier, and I don't know. I recently talked with Blake, our bestie from Easy Taxi. He's the MD for Lala Move, right? So he was basically responsible for the whole international expansion to Asia and now US, where he's now based. And he's been trying to scratch his head. So Lala Move is the perfect corollary for the logistics arm for these kinds of deliveries. So he's thinking about this problem every day. And he couldn't figure it out for US, where there's lack of density, very high cost. He says there's possibly demand, but I don't know. Our discussion was that maybe it kind of makes sense more for the European markets where there's very dense centers. Maybe for China, it makes sense too.
LATAM, it works. LATAM has incredible unit economics and density.
Yeah. But for US, I think it's a big struggle. So maybe this model makes more sense globally outside of a big country that's spread out like US. I don't know.
If you look at China, Miss Fresh and Dino Meister both are US listed companies. You look at the economics, and they have not exactly proven this model that can be profitable. So the big question is that, can anyone prove that grocery can be done online in a profitable and sustainable way?
Well, I think that's different for US markets, where Instacart has focused on the healthy aspect of where it's big enough to make it work. Other countries I'm very skeptical about, though. I don't know, but Andrew, you're a user. You actually use it a lot, so maybe you have a better take on this. I don't know.
Well,
I don't go for
groceries
groceries on apps and stuff.
What do you mean?
Both groceries or 15-minute deliveries are kind of somewhat interrelated.
Dude, I think there's a same thing I said in the last podcast we had, right? I think the unit economics works because of the pandemic. Whether or not it lasts for the long run is questionable, but I think there is a model where this stuff.
Does that mean you'd be shorting these companies?
No. I think there's a model.
Would you short Uber? Would you short Delivery Hero?
Dude, it's a catch-22 here, right? One is there's sufficient retail support for these stocks that they will do okay over time, right? And then the question is will most people move towards having their food delivered to them, whether they are at work or at home, regardless of whether it's a work from home kind of situation, right? I think the world will move to a model where more and more people want to eat at home. And so when that happens, the question is who are the winners and how do you bet on them? I think these platforms do have a chance. It's just hard to figure out who's the winner.
All right, guys. Dave, you haven't said anything about this. What do you think?
Well, I think that's I just have one point. Because actually reading about this, interestingly enough. I think it's the difference between like food delivery and instant sort of quick commerce. Did you guys know that Joker loses $159 per order?
I'm not surprised.
No, I'm not
Sorry,
surprised,
sorry.
right? But like,
Gross or net?
But
that's a great question.
you're including marketing costs as well.
It doesn't.
This
You're including marketing
includes
and
marketing
HR,
costs, yeah,
right?
it includes
those-
marketing costs.
Are you including
Yeah,
headcount
yeah,
in there or
those
no?
numbers.
I believe those are not including. It's direct
Headcount,
costs.
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think it includes. So it should be like logistics, marketing, but I don't think it includes like the cost of like the marketing person's salary.
The last company that I heard economics like that, what was that Singapore company? Honest Bee had very similar numbers for delivery when they first launched.
exactly.
And we know how that story went out.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have much to say on this particular topic except just to toss a data point out there. I'll leave you with that.
The question is that from an investor point of view, what are you looking in these kind of companies? And because I mean, it's very hard to make an economics work. So I mean, how does it make sense?
Well, I don't think it makes sense, but I've always been very, I feel like I've been very consistent in my take on that. These quick commerce companies and grocery delivered on the internet, these companies don't make sense to me. I don't understand why we keep, trying to do the same thing over and over again. So you're asking the wrong person.
Do you believe that someone will eventually figure out how to do delivery on how to do groceries online, and that there's a strong sense of FOMO here going on?
I think what happens. Okay, well, never say never, right? I mean, given a long enough period of time, of course, it will eventually happen, right? But I think what happens here is people, get too seduced by like the market size and the narrative, right? And I think people get, I don't say greedy because that's probably a bit simplistic way of phrasing it, but like people are always going to come back because the market exists, or just because it can theoretically be done, doesn't mean it should be done. I think is where I'm going with this one, right? So I think, this is people trying to solve a problem that doesn't truly exist.
Well, I think you do create a new category, but it's just not as big as the valuations are right now. Like, I mean, technology brought in this. There will be a percentage of people who would like this, but maybe it's just not the TAM that it's not the whole grocery ecosystem, market system, right? That's what it is. So just too much venture money chasing valuations that don't exist. Or same thing with Dave says, essentially.
Speaking of which, Alex, a bit of thing that we might want to talk about next time. So about all these social commerce and community group by companies, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
There's some shift there, and we know that one of the best funded Indonesian players can't sustain themselves. They're probably on the verge of shutting down. But on the other hand, you have some Chinese players which got lots of funding but couldn't improve the business model in China. Still have a lot of money left in the bank account. Actually, just went into Indonesia and started building business there. So it's a very interesting dynamics. Yeah.
We talk about that next time for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess we can leave it here, guys. So thanks for a good episode. Yeah. All right, guys.
Let's see what Andrew's hairstyle will become next time.
Yes. He'll be bald. He'll be bald.
You never know.
Yeah.
Ciao, guys. This is awesome.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Did you guys hear about the Peloton CEO?
Yeah, he had to resign.
Well, then no, the new one.
No, what happened? To the new
some
one?
old guy, 67-year-old Barry McCarthy. And
Yeah.
he's refusing to move across the country to run the company. I think his goal